Hey everybody, this is Alfred Edmond Jr. Welcome to Beyond the Hype with Black Enterprise. I'm your host as always, and I have a really special guest, not only because of what he does now, in the context of everything we're dealing with in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, the push to reform conduct of police, criminal justice reform, and the whole nine, particularly with Black men and Black communities. So what he does now makes him an important guest for this show, but also how he came to be who he is also gives some special relevancy to this show. So please, right up at the top, please welcome DeJuan Patterson, who is Youth Justice Partnership Coordinator for the Criminal Justice Office of the Mayor of Baltimore. Did I get that right?
Yes.
So first of all, before we kick it off, how are you doing? How are things going in Baltimore? And what is your work like right now in your current role?
Well, it's very interesting times, to say the least. What we're experiencing here, not only in Baltimore, but globally. We're seeing a level of awareness and shift that we have never seen before in our time. Very similar, maybe some things have been similar to evoke some change, but the way we're going and where we're at right now is really important. My work right now in the center is around making sure that we are amplifying the voices of community, maintaining public safety in a very comprehensive community-led way.
Now you are uniquely positioned, as I said at the top, to be doing this kind of work. And just to set it up, everybody, one of the things that DeJuan is known as is Baltimore's walking angel. And to give you a peek at why that is, we're going to cut into a clip of a documentary by that title called Baltimore's Walking Angel that really will bring some clarity to why DeJuan is really, really well positioned to have this conversation on Beyond the Hype.
Just like any other night, I was just leaving a long day of work from my summer job in East Baltimore. I stopped past a friend's house. I picked up one of the neighborhood bikes and I asked one of my homegirls, can I use her phone, listen to the ringtones? And started making my way to my aunt's house. And while on the bike, I was listening to ringtones and just enjoying myself, reciting the lyrics. And then I told myself, pay attention to your surroundings, so I put my phone down. I look up, and there's a gunman at my side. I knew that I had to give him what I had, so I gave him everything I had, and I looked back down, and I said, it's not mine. That's not my phone. He said, I don't care. Give me that too. I gave it to him, and that wasn't enough. So he told me, turn around. And that's when he pulled the trigger. My body went into shock and those things like that. And just with an ounce of strength left inside my body and a little bit of vision I had from this one eye, and I pick up and I'm wondering, looking for some help, saying someone can help me. And I get the strength to open up my eye just a little bit. And this time, I'm staring down the barrel of another gun. I was staring down the barrel of the police.
Wow, DeJuan. When I saw this doc, I mean, I was impressed by, what I learned about you when my former, Black Enterprise colleague, your friend, told me about you and said, listen, you should look at this brother, given what we're going through right now. But when I saw the doc, I was literally blown away. I mean, you are uniquely positioned as someone who can really speak to the challenges that face Black communities and young Black men in particular, that on the one hand, you're in environments that often can be dangerous for you in terms of criminal activity, and you have to cope with that stress and pressure. But then on the other hand, you don't always feel, or maybe you never feel, that a solution that would be, you would consider the natural solution, that the police will come to your aid. That's not always the case in our communities either. So you know, as a Black male in particular, and I've been there as well, as a young Black male, you almost feel like no one really is on your side in terms of surviving. So first of all, talk about what that experience was like for you and how that shaped who you are today.
Sure. Just giving me a moment, and also give the people who are watching this and just recently seen that video. I know that it can be very traumatic and triggering for some people, just as it is triggering and traumatic for me. Just dating back a little bit, that event happened nearly 15 years ago this year. And as mentioned inside the story, it took me nearly 10 years to actually publicly want to share that story, and growing pause to why I felt like I could not share that story. Going back into August 2005, who would have guessed that those type of experiences will impact and shape the rest of my life? Now I have lived my entire adulthood where that event is cemented as like the sun of my universe. Oftentimes, prior to the releasing of this documentary and some of my featured publications in different places, I was shy to share that. Reason being, at the time, knowing that a young Black boy growing up in Baltimore, Maryland, we are stigmatized. You know, often we are seen as thugs, criminals, and people that are not worthy of respect. Of course, I didn't know all of this stuff at 17. I was going through life. Unfortunately, at 17, I was released from the hospital prematurely, probably due to not only the color of my skin, but the socioeconomic status in which I have been born into. So given that situation, I was released without any type of personal rehabilitation plan and things of that nature, going into a family who are not medically trained, any form of those stuff like that. So it was a real troubling time for me to try to understand what my world was, you know, what it will be next. So returning home, I went back into my grandmother's house, and my eyesight was still little. My head was swollen. At that time, I couldn't imagine my eyesight restoring or even function of my eyebrows and other different facial functions. But I had the drive and the will to, hey, let's keep the faith that this will continue to go on. And at times like that, being the typical high schooler, teenager, only thing I wanted to do was return back to school. School was my safe haven. And that was a place where I received love and affection and understanding. However, the school did not know how to receive me as a gun violence victim. It could be a potential threat to other students or a threat to myself, not understanding it. But for me, I just wanted to go back to the place that accepted me, provided me with that love and nurture. So it was a very pivotal time to get us to a different place. And as we mentioned, I view education as a tool to liberate my family, provide an opportunity. So being as that I was the oldest grandchild, the only male grandchild at the time, I had an obligation to my family. So I had to finish high school. I had no aspirations of actually attending college. However, up until this event, I noticed the impact that it had on my mom and my grandma. So that propelled me to want to study what contributed to youth violence and aggression. and leaving Baltimore was that way.
So listen, I want to jump in here because you hit on several important points that's really relevant to what we're going through today, not only in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests for police reform and it's just against systemic racism, but also the pandemic. And you talked about the health consequences and the health disparities that you experienced as a young Black male who had been injured, seriously injured, could have been killed. And like you said, the health system wasn't necessarily prepared to provide for you in a way that was equitable. Your family, it was not necessarily equipped to deal with it. Your school is not necessarily equipped to deal with it. So again, this one incident around being a victim of a crime, being seen as a suspect before being seen as a victim by the police, and then the whole process after that continues to reinforce all of these issues and questions that have been raised by the coronavirus, as well as by the protests and the push to, against systemic racism. But the other thing I want to say is that a lot of people would have been broken, would have lost hope, would have said, forget school, forget trying to make anything of myself, surrender to this environment. I can't win, why try, why go? Talk to me about why you went in a different direction, that obviously ultimately became a positive direction, but also what could have been lost. I mean, what you've accomplished since then is an illustration of the lost potential of young Black men, whether they died to criminal violence or police violence, whatever it is. You're a living example of what would not have happened had you not survived that night.
Yeah. Said a lot, and it triggers a lot for me. I'm now recalling a conversation that I had with current now Congresswoman Lucy McBeth down in Georgia.
Who lost her son to gun violence.
Absolutely, Jordan. She lost her son to gun violence in Jordan, and we had an on-air interview with the Washington Post, and I shared with her that I am the manifestation if her son would have survived gun violence.
Wow.
And
wow.
I know that is a strong statement, but that I am a representation of what Black men could be beyond the hashtag of rest in peace. And my experience that now I'm more evolved and mature to be in a place to better articulate it. But at that time, I will be honest, I wasn't so positive, hopeful, driven. I was angry. I wanted to understand why me, but I learned to transmute that energy. One, first of all, I see the impact that it had on my immediate family. And there's a level of collateral impact that gun violence have on the immediate individual. Saying that impact had on my mom, my grandma, my sisters, my aunts and stuff like that, I wanted to give them a peace of mind. So I went off to college and said, hey, let me go ahead and go some distance away from Baltimore, but close enough that I could reach Baltimore in a case of emergency. And during that time, I wanted to understand what contribute to this level of youth violence and aggression. And while at Bowie State University, HBCUs, I had an experience. Now, mind you, while in college, no one really knew my story. I was just a kid inside my residence hall doing my work, and somebody called a friend who was back at home, and they learned about my story. And it took me off ground because I never wanted anyone to know about this story. I didn't want to glorify it. It wasn't no 50 cents. I'm trying to be a gangster, none of the stuff like that. But then I started to see something change. By my second year of college, I started a youth program at Chicklepen Middle School. And I used my story to reach some at-risk youth, young men in particular. And I saw the impact that it had not only on them, but me. So I used the power of helping others to help myself. And in the process, I healed myself. And that started to catapult down to continue to want to investigate what contribute to the factors, develop youth programs to prevent the person from being a victim on both ends of the gun. Because oftentimes we don't even see the person on the other end of the gun being victim of a circumstance. And how can we champion those issues? So from those experiences kind of put me on the path, the trajectory that I'm on today. And undergraduate, I studied what contributes to youth violence and aggression at an individual level, started youth programs, but then having the opportunity to partner up with the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services and the probation in the Prince George's public school system, I learned that a lot of young people who are juvenile justice committed suffer from social emotional disorders. And I wanted to go further. And during that time, I started to see the mental health impact and community health of it. And then that was like the next level of it at the graduate school level was understanding community health and systems, and take it even further to want to finish out my master's degree in public policy. So now I can continue the level of impact because I saw what could be if they had more examples of me and other positive experiences that we could change life outcomes. And now to see system reform is another way. And for lack of better words, to try to get us down to how I got closer to where I am today is doing those steps in my journey.
You know, and just for our audience to remind you, Lucy McBath, her political career basically launched because her son was killed pretty much for playing loud music. That's what it boiled down to. He got a dispute. Him and his friends, they were playing music. Somebody thought it was too loud, and the man shot him and killed him. And so, again, sadly, part of the reason I want to have this conversation is that we got to get past the hashtags because we get a new name and a new hashtag. It feels like every 6 months. And part of the current movement is that everyone's hopeful that we're finally reaching a point in this country where hopefully that can change, but it has to be systemic change. And you said a couple other things that just now around, because you have this push that, you know, some people are calling it defund the police. That's not necessarily a term that's flying really well in terms of how that's being interpreted. But my understanding of it is that many of the resources that are currently devoted totally to law enforcement isn't equipped to handle. They're not trained to handle. Most of the time, they don't want to handle it. And in Black and Brown communities, often there are other services. You mentioned some of them: mental health services, educational services, after-school programs to find for safe places for kids to go after school, so that the burden on law enforcement to address these issues is lightened. It doesn't mean law enforcement goes away, but they are now being called to deal with law enforcement issues, not mental health issues, not domestic violence issues, not idle children after school issues that can turn into tragedies. So a lot of the work that you've done, now and as you took this path to who you are today, has been around those issues. So how important is it that we do address, no matter what you call it, the lack of resources that you even experience as a victim in your community that constantly puts law enforcement as the first person people call or the first people they encounter, when it shouldn't always be the first, that it should be the encounter of last resort in many situations?
That's one of the, I'm speaking in my private capacity. Mm-hmm. But in my professional capacity, I work directly with Baltimore City Police Department, the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, community organizations and leaders, and being the nexus to where we can bring about public safety in a community-centered way is the real direction forward. And I think sometimes in the current climate, we get sidetracked with the oversimplification of the hashtag defund the police. Mm-hmm. If I may, I will give an example of a story. This story is about Tavon and Taylor. They come from two different worlds, but not that far apart. Tavon lives in urban America, lives in the city. When he goes outside, he looks outside his window, and if he sees a police car outside his window, he runs out of fear. Both of these are like 10-year-old boys, Black boys particularly. They run with terror. Tavon would run away from the window and think of all the things that he may have done wrong. It could range from not completing his homework assignment, not taking the chicken out the refrigerator because his mama told him to do that earlier today. You know, it could be, will I experience being arrested, being killed? You know, so Tavon would run away from the police from all these thoughts. Now let's go travel down the Beltway, about 30 to 45 minutes away, suburban America. In suburban America, the affluent household income is averaging about over 90,000. In Tavon's area, it's about 30,000. So Taylor's home, he looks out the window, see a police car outside. You see a police car outside. He runs towards the police car because now he knows that that is the car of Officer Johnson. Officer Johnson experiences is affirmed inside Taylor's head because he remember Officer Johnson let him play with the sirens, the megaphone. He even let him play with the handcuffs. But the difference between Taylor and Tavon is Taylor get to see himself as chasing robbers and killers. Now, Tavon see himself as a victim of robbers and killers that terrorize his neighborhoods. So if we want to think about how can we transform the police in a way that these realities are really similar to each other and is a nonviolent and combative approach. So we see where police are not interacting with youth and community in a violent law enforcement warrior type mentality. You know, ironically, we watched my short documentary clip of me being a victim of police violence, but I had a complete different experience growing up. We had the Baltimore City Athletically Power Center, which we call it, where police were interacting with youth. They was playing foosball with us, playing catch, sitting with us, chatting, playing Uno, those different things. So I had a really different experience with police. Even my biggest mentor in college was a school police officer. He was an authoritative figure that I did not have in the household. That was Officer Lanzi. You know, hold me accountable. So when we see that there's opportunity for positive police interaction, those police tend to see themselves as a member of the community, not occupying the community. So these are the type of solutions and perspectives that we would like to see happen across America, and making the police the last resort instead of the first resort. Let some community policing leaders actually lead the way on maintaining public safety and nonviolent capacities.
You know, you said some powerful things, and it brings my point in having you have this conversation is that, like you said, it's easy to oversimplify things with a hashtag, you know, defund the police, or hashtag the names, or obviously, you know, you have legislators in Washington that are pushing a certain agenda, and you know, and you have obviously the movement needs to be amplified, so we get that. So there'll be headlines on CNN and newspapers around the country. But then at some point, that has to trickle down to the streets and to the ground and to the people. Somebody has to figure out what does this look like on the ground. For this series, I also interviewed a brother who is on the civilian investigation panel for the city of Miami, who also said, listen, at some point, all of that that's going on the news or in Washington has to trickle down to the ground to make it happen. And so one thing I want to talk with you about is, what does that mean to you now in your current work? Yes, some policies are going to change, but at some point, the reality is what happens on the ground with police, with communities that still have to deal with crime. It's not like you don't need law enforcement,
right,
but also have other challenges that make police necessary, but not always the right answer. The bottom line is, what does that mean for your work? When the headlines go away, when the protests stop, when CNN starts to focus on the election or something else, you and the mayor and your colleagues in Baltimore and in cities across the country still have to do things on the ground to make it real for the people. So what does that mean for you once you get past the headlines and the hashtags, once you get beyond the hype?
Right. We had a great example here in Baltimore that I wish we can maintain the momentum, scale, the impact and the outcomes. So the first weekend of the protest, it was like a Monday, it was an informal network of community leaders and organizers that got together, mobilized. Some people knew each other first degree, some people knew each other third degree. However, we actually see the common goal. It was to maintain public safety for young people who was peacefully demonstrating and leading the movement, give them space to give the young people space to lead the demonstration. And this demonstration and protest was as a result of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, to actually make sure we say their names. The next goal was to maintain the integrity of the cause without allowing outside agitators or influencers to distract from the mission of the demonstration. And that moved me so much because community leaders across Baltimore from different neighborhoods, different organizations that may not always agree, came together for a singular purpose, and that was to protect the people, the integrity of the cause, and continue to get the awareness and the actions and demands that which we love. But the next side of it was, that was a public safety law enforcement side of it. The justice, we say the justice stakeholders that were champions on the other side. Being as though that they came from Baltimore City, they have grandchildren and children living in the city that pretty much may be also a part of the protest. They said that we will allow you guys to police yourself, community police yourself, maintain as much safety as you can, which was huge. So you had opportunities where there, and this is all public information documented, where there were local leaders and activists who held the protesters and other colleagues to a standard of accountability in community policing. So those are the type of things that I would like to continue to see, and that answer your question, what it looks like on the ground. Now, if we were to pick up that model and place it inside the communities, you have credible messengers. You have these organizations who are violent interrupters. You have people who are the informal leaders of the neighborhood that operate as interrupters, information sharing, and also service and providers. You know, these are the type of ways in which this work will reach on the ground when the cameras are no longer here. Because just like anybody else that live inside a community, we have an obligation to the community members that we have to walk past every single day. You know, whether you have a particular job title, a certain car or a house, you still got to walk past community members in which you live with.
You know, one of the challenges that we've been discussing as Black journalists who have to cover this, as people that do your kind of work, is your ability to protect your own, you know, mental wellness as you're dealing with all these challenges. And in your case, I would imagine that you used the word triggering earlier in the interview. The challenge of working in this space, which you've chosen to do and you were inspired to do to make things better. But you have to also, I would imagine, deal with the emotion of seeing what happened to George Floyd, seeing what happened to Breonna Taylor, Lucy McBath's son, and that. I mean, to what degree is that re-triggering for you, and how do you manage that in order to continue to move forward and do the work that you do, and just to live your life? I mean, beyond your professional life, to live your life and try to be healthy. How do you manage all of that?
If I'm honest, that is a recurring lesson and theme that I have to adjust to and readjust once I get over a particular experience. Yeah, one of the most public hashtags of when we see Black people suffer from police violence, you know, and gun violence. But there was one particular victim of gun violence that impacted me and was really triggered. It was the rapper, business mogul Nipsey Hussle. Yes. Nipsey Hussle was an enigma, let's say, because he stemmed from the community, but also wanted to did reinvest inside the community. He lived inside the community and fell victim to the community violence inside the community. So those moments and sentiments reoccur to me. Like, I live inside some of the areas in which other people will not. Being amongst my people, and just to think that I'm fighting battles on multiple fronts. Now, being a Black man in America, you also have institutional violence, police violence, and also community violence. And how do I continue to adjust myself and prepare myself that this is my reality? It's not something that you adjust to, because we're human. And if you adjust to it so much, you desensitize yourself, become numb. And so, like some of my young brothers out here that have to self-medicate to cope with this realities and dealing with the level of depression and PTSD-related disorder. Yes. Those are some of the things that we share. And I try to find my self-care regiments of detaching myself from the environments, detaching myself from the constant exposure to graphic images online, graphic conversations about violence, and have to center myself and take care of myself during some of these times. So remember to unplug, finding your inner peace, and that inner peace may look different from, based on who you are. And it could just be taking that long time and removing yourself from the environment.
So in the final moments of our conversation, I want you to, kind of talk to me about, everybody's saying that we've been through this before, but this time it feels different. The protests are different. They're all across the country. They're all around the world. It's not just Black people protesting, it's people, multiple generations and multiple races. And so people are like, maybe this time will be different. For you, both as a person who's lived these experiences in Baltimore, both at the hands of, like you said, community violence and police violence, and as a professional who is committed to youth justice and community improvement, and serving the city of Baltimore, which is your home and where you're from. What is your hope? What is your hope for what the outcome of this chapter that we're going through will be? What do you think is possible? What do you think is realistic? And what do you think, will make you feel like this was different? This outcome really did make it different this time than it was for Eric Garner or, Trayvon Martin, or, again, we can go with Sandra Bland. What would you like to see happen? What do you think is realistic for us to expect to happen?
Gradual success and accomplishments. And if you ask me what it looks like, community-based public safety. And that will look like an inclusion of community leaders, organizations, and justice stakeholders when necessary. Incorporating the public health departments across agencies, our mental health workers is one, but it's 3 Ps that I always lead with in my work, as well as my consulting capacity. It is programs, partnerships, and policy. This is a gradual, systemic approach to a problem. Programs that helps to address the immediate needs that's happening today. And we was to establish programs where we would reallocate and help support some of the community-based leaders who are violent interrupters, maintaining public safety, and however you may define that, gun violence prevention, because oftentimes some organizations don't explicitly say they're gun violence prevention organizations, they just do the work in gun violence neighborhoods. So helping to reallocate the resources and develop programs, support programs in those capacities, and also have people who are viewers support some of your local organizations with the financial resources if you can't dedicate the time and talent. The next thing is strategic partnerships. Those partnerships may exist with corporate America, large institutions and fund managers, things of that nature. And let us move beyond the hashtag, beyond the hype, similar to the name of the show. Move beyond the hype. Yes, I love to see, it feels good to see the graphics of every brand, institution, corporation promote Black Lives Matter. But I also want to see the reallocation of resources dedicated towards the solution. I would like to see the diversity of executive leadership that reflect that you value Black lives, Black workers, Black institutions, Black colleges, Black schools. These are the type of solutions I envision people to have. Next, it will be the policies. Policies that continue to support these things. Here in Maryland, we had a historical lawsuit where historical Black colleges and university sued the state of Maryland higher education because it was de facto segregated higher education system in which the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the HBCUs. So understanding how policy can help implement a long-standing remedy to these issues are really important. And lastly, outside of that, and it hovers inside it, some immediate action that we can see is some of the people now during this time understand that it's different because everybody has a lane. Not everybody needs to be on the front line. You can support the front line, whether it's local bail funds, local organizations who are training and leading or advocating for policy. There's also this other thing where we're not talking a lot about is these donor advisory funds, where you can also set up your charity giving, your retirement funds, and things of that nature to go directly to these funds that actually support local organizations to drive a solution. And you can do that from your phone. So you don't even have to leave the seat of your couch. You don't just have to tweet. You can go ahead and pick up the phone, call your nearest fund manager, and ask them, how can I set up one of these funds to support the work? And that's how we do economic justice, and that eventually have social justice in our community.
Let's close with your whole thing about helping people on both sides of the gun. And again, you're uniquely positioned. You're talking about whether it's the police person, law enforcement officers on one side of the gun, a community member on one side of the gun, a criminal on one side of the gun, and everybody on every side of the gun has to be a part of this solution or it doesn't work. And obviously you've experienced that in a way that's very, very unique and live to tell the tale. And let's not say it's totally unique. Unfortunately, many people experience it and don't live to tell the tale and don't live to serve as a result of that experience. Talk to me about how you approach your life personally and professionally around this idea that everybody on every side of the gun, whether you're holding it or whether it's being pointed at you, has to be part of this equation if we're going to move forward.
I try to always focus on the human element. If we see people as humans beyond their socioeconomic status, their title, their employment, their affiliation, we will see that they also is going through emotions and experiences. Working closely with some of the people across the spectrum, I know that there are some gun violence victims as well as offenders who need some healing themselves, and how to get to that place. I also know that there are some law enforcement officers or officials, because we're not just talking about the police officer on patrol, but the Justice Department, the prosecutors, and things of that nature. They also have a level and dire need to continue the level of public safety. So understanding people's experiences is really important, and also know that some of the things that we always hear that police officers want to go home to. I will admit, every time I have this conversation, and I'm thinking of some of the law enforcement, one of my community champions who was a part of Baltimore Police Department, she shared something, and she said that I am a grandmother and a mother with children and grandchildren that lives, socialized, educated, and play in this city. So I have a stake in this city to maintain that. So bringing her inside there and people like her inside the conversation, the solution is important. Bringing a young man who fell victim to the circumstances of a broken home, poverty, and looking for an alternative outcome, we got to bring them in and hear that story in the person which is the victim. So I think that is really important while we drive this work together, and I believe we can do this together, and that's why I will continue to say a slogan of mine and moving forward in the advisory capacity, be the bridge to opportunity. So we can all get to the other side together.
DeJuan, listen, I really appreciate you being on this show. I appreciate everything you're doing. The more I learn about you, the more deeper my appreciation is. You're doing great work from a very, very unique perspective as Baltimore's walking angel. Thank you so much for being a guest on Beyond the Hype.
Thank you for having me.
And this is Alfred Edmond Jr. with Beyond the Hype for Black Enterprise. Thanks for joining us.